You listening, Grandpa? Or is that hearing aid just for decoration? Lieutenant Ryan's voice cut through the low hum of the bar. The young men behind him laughed, confident, entertained. The old man did not look up, not once. His hands wrapped around the glass as if it anchored him to the world. The bar seemed to shrink around him. Ryan shouted, "Move it. Active duty only in this corner." Slowly, the man lifted the amber liquid to his lips, the soft clink of the glass echoing like a gunshot. Every patron went still. Every eye was on him. Even the music seemed to pause. Something told them all that this man carried a storm no one dared challenge. Lieutenant Ryan leaned closer, voice lowered, sharp. "You know who I am, don't you?" He tried to mask it with bravado, but the faint tremor in his tone betrayed uncertainty. The old man's eyes lifted, calm, deliberate. Not a flicker of fear, not a hint of surprise. Just steady observation, like he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Maybe I do," the man said, voice gravelly but steady, carrying the weight of decades. "Maybe I don't." The single sentence cut through the laughter of Ryan's crew, leaving a vacuum of silence that settled over the bar like fog. Ryan gestured to the young SEALs behind him. "You see this? This booth is ours. Old man, move aside." He smiled, thinking the intimidation would work. It never did. The old man simply set his glass back down, the amber liquid catching the low light, then rested his hands on the table, folded neatly. He did not flinch. He did not move. A bartender, mid-wipe of a glass, stopped, sensing the shift in energy. Other veterans at nearby tables straightened slightly, watching. Something about the calm in the old man's posture spoke louder than Ryan's shouting. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "I said move," he repeated louder, sharper. There was a hesitation now, a crack in his confidence. The crew laughed nervously. They had assumed they were untouchable, that youth and aggression would dominate the silence of the bar. But the old man leaned back slightly, gaze unwavering. "Lieutenant," he said finally, deliberately drawing the word out, "do you even know who you are talking to?" The room froze. Ryan's smile faltered. 4 young SEALs behind him stiffened. Every veteran in the bar, every regular, every newcomer felt the weight of those words. They knew this was not idle boasting. This was recognition of a presence that had survived decades of wars, battles, and losses that no one living had the right to question. A long moment passed. Then, slowly, deliberately, the old man raised the glass to his lips again, taking another sip. The clink was soft this time, but the silence remained. A quiet declaration that he was not a man to be trifled with. Lieutenant Ryan swallowed, a mixture of fear and curiosity tightening his chest. He knew, somehow, that this old man had stories, missions, and a reputation that the young SEALs could not even imagine. And Ryan, against his pride, could not resist asking the question that would set the night in motion. "Sir," he said, voice careful now, measured, respectful, "may I ask your call sign?" The bar seemed to inhale as one. Every eye locked on the corner table. Every breath hung suspended. The old man's gaze met Ryan's, unflinching, carrying decades of ghosts that no one dared name. And then he spoke, but the answer would wait. The old man sat in silence for a moment, letting the hum of the bar settle around him. Outside, rain pounded against the windows in steady rhythm, matching the quiet pulse of tension in the room. Lieutenant Ryan shifted, unsure if he should press or wait. He could feel the weight in the air, the kind of weight that only comes from decades lived in battles most could never imagine. "Call sign," Ryan repeated, quieter this time. Respect edged his voice, a mix of curiosity and fear. He noticed for the first time the depth in the old man's eyes. They were not just tired eyes. They were eyes that had seen too much and carried it without complaint. The room remained still. The regulars, sensing something was about to unfold. The old man leaned back slightly in his chair, resting his hands on the table. "Why do you want to know?" he asked. There was no mockery, no arrogance, only a calm that made Ryan feel unsteady. "Because I've heard things," Ryan admitted, lowering his gaze to the table. "Stories on base, rumors about a man called the Reaper. No one talks about him, but everyone knows the name." His fingers tapped nervously against the wood, betraying his controlled exterior. The old man did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting the weight of decades press in, letting Ryan feel the uncomfortable space between the question and the answer. "You want the glory?" he asked finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "Or are you searching for the truth?" Ryan shook his head. "Truth," he said without hesitation. He was honest even when his pride warned him not to be. "I need to understand what kind of man could carry that name." The old man's eyes softened slightly. "You don't understand yet," he said. "There are things better left unspoken, things that haunt you whether the world ever knows or not. Glory isn't what makes a man, Lieutenant. Survival, regret, those are the teachers." Ryan leaned in, captivated, despite himself. He had trained with men like this, men who spoke little, who acted decisively, whose reputations were built on whispers. Yet there was something different about him. He carried decades of missions in his eyes alone, a weight of choices, of lives taken, and lives saved, that Ryan could feel without needing a single story yet. "You're right," Ryan said slowly, finally meeting the old man's gaze fully. I do want to understand. I need to know. The old man nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then sit. Listen carefully, because what you think you know is only the surface, and what you learn may not leave you the same. The bar, once humming with conversation and clinking glasses, seemed to fade further into the background. Rain tapped rhythmically against the windows as the old man began to speak, not yet of missions or call signs, but of the life that shaped him before the legend began, a life of routine and hardship, of choices that weighed heavily on his soul. He spoke of a small town, a family he lost too soon, and of the first days in uniform when idealism met harsh reality. Ryan listened, spellbound. Every word was deliberate, every pause measured. The old man's voice carried a depth that hinted at battles fought in the jungles, the mountains, and in the heart, though those stories had not yet been told. By the time the first sip of whiskey passed Ryan's lips, he understood the truth of the silence he had disturbed. This was not a man to impress. This was a man whose past demanded respect, a man whose story could only be shared with those patient enough to earn it. And tonight, Lieutenant Ryan had earned the first fragment. The old man's eyes drifted to the dim corner of the bar where the rain streaked against the windows, tracing the reflection of a lifelong past. They called me Reaper, he said finally, voice low but steady, carrying weight in every syllable. The bar seemed to lean in, as if even the walls wanted to hear the story. Ryan felt his own pulse quicken. He had expected a name. He had not expected the room itself to hold its breath. The old man continued, eyes narrowing slightly, remembering, it was not a name I chose. It was given to me, after a night I will never forget. My unit was deep in the jungle, surrounded. We had been cut off, our radios dead, and the only way out was forward. Everyone thought we were finished. Everyone except him. He paused, letting the tension hang, letting Ryan feel the pressure of decades in that pause. The young SEAL shifted slightly, leaning closer, trying to catch every detail, every nuance of the man's voice. The rest of the bar had gone silent. Glasses balanced midair, regulars stopped breathing, and the rain outside seemed to fall slower. I moved through the darkness, the old man said. Every step, every breath calculated. My team had been trained, yes, but no one expects a person to walk through hell and come out the other side intact. I did not do it for glory. I did it because they depended on me. One mistake, one hesitation, and they would have died. Ryan swallowed. The fear, the tension, the weight of history pressed down on him. He had been in operations. He had faced danger. He had faced loss. But there was a difference between fear you could train for and fear that carved itself into your soul. The old man carried that Ferrand had carried it alone for decades. They started calling me Reaper after that night. He continued, voice softer now, almost regretful. Not because I wanted it, not because I asked, because my enemies whispered it in fear. And my friends, learned to rely on it. He let the whiskey glass spin slowly in his hands. Ryan realized then that this was not a story of heroism. It was a story of survival, of moral compromise, of choices no one outside those jungles could understand. The old man's eyes flickered with memory, pain, and the faintest shadow of pride. There were missions that went wrong, he said, voice tighter now. Civilians caught in crossfire, intelligence failures, teammates lost, mistakes that could not be undone. You think the call sign brings respect. It brings fear, yes, but it also carries the burden of every life lost that you could not save. Everyone in the room seemed to shrink further. Rain hammered harder against the windows as Ryan leaned forward, suddenly aware of the silence that pressed against his ears. He had expected a legend. What he found was a man who had paid with his soul for every whispered tale of glory. And that is why I left the unit, the old man said finally, voice almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret meant only for Ryan. Not because I was tired, not because I feared death, because I had seen too much, because I could not carry the weight any longer without breaking. Ryan felt the weight in his chest, a mixture of awe and sorrow. This was not a man to imitate. This was a man to understand. And as the old man set the glass back down, steady as ever, Ryan knew that the legend of Reaper was not built on victories, but on sacrifice, loss, and choices no one else could bear. The old man leaned back, eyes locking on Ryan's. Now you know the beginning, but the story you came for, is far from over. Lieutenant Ryan had listened in silence, absorbing every word, every pause, every weight carried in the old man's voice. He thought he understood danger, missions, and sacrifice. He thought he knew fear. But now, sitting across from the man who had been called Reaper, Ryan realized he had not even touched the surface. Sir, Ryan began hesitantly, unsure if the question would break the fragile trust forming between them. What really broke you? The old man's eyes darkened. A shadow passed over his face, fleeting but unmistakable. He rested his hands on the table, clasped loosely, like he was preparing himself to carry the burden of words that had waited decades to be spoken. There was a family, he said finally, voice quiet but precise, caught in the crossfire of a mission gone wrong. Intelligence had failed. My team and we moved too late. I reached them, but not in time. He paused. Ryan could hear the faint tremor in the words. Children, parents, all gone. And I carried it alone. Every day since the bar seemed to shrink further. Patrons looked down at their drinks, pretending not to listen, but even they felt the weight of the story. Ryan's hands tightened into fists under the table. He had seen death, yes, but nothing like this. Nothing that belonged to him. I was trained to save lives, to protect. I failed. And no one outside those jungles could ever understand that kind of guilt. The old man continued. You train, you fight, you survive. But some ghosts follow you home, and no one can exorcise them. Ryan swallowed hard, voice trembling slightly despite his attempts at control. I've feared failing my team, but I never imagined. The old man raised a hand, stopping him gently but firmly. Fear is nothing. Regret is heavy. The difference is carrying it and letting it shape you, or letting it destroy you. I chose to survive with it, to live, but I almost didn't. For a long moment neither spoke. Rain streaked the windows, a quiet, relentless drumbeat that mirrored the pounding of Ryan's heart. Then the old man leaned closer, eyes locking on Ryan's. The Reaper died that day. That man, the legend. He ceased to exist when the family died. What remains now is Walter. Nothing more, nothing less. Ryan felt a shift deep inside him. It was not shock. It was understanding, humility. A recognition that courage was not measured in missions completed or enemies defeated, but in surviving the impossible, carrying the weight, and still choosing to act with honor. I came seeking the legend, Ryan admitted softly, but I see now it is not glory I needed to understand. It is the man, the choices, the cost. Walter's eyes softened. For the first time, the corners of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. You listen well, he said, and maybe, just maybe, that means you will not make the same mistakes. But be warned. Some truths are heavier than metals, Lieutenant, heavier than any battlefield. Ryan exhaled, realizing the full gravity of the stories he had asked to hear. He had expected a hero. He found a man, haunted and human, who had survived the impossible and yet carried the burden in silence for decades outside. The rain fell harder, relentless. Inside, the bar remained still. 2 generations sat across from each other, bound by understanding, the past echoing in the quiet between them. And somewhere in that silence, Ryan understood that everything had changed. The night was no longer just about a call sign. It was about legacy, truth, and the cost of being called Reaper. The bar had settled into a tense quiet after Walter's revelation. Rain hammered the windows outside, its rhythm steady and unforgiving, echoing the weight of decades-long silence between men who had carried too much. Lieutenant Ryan sat forward, leaning closer, the questions pressing him like an unrelenting tide. You lived through all of that, Ryan said softly, voice barely above the bar's hum. And yet you just stayed quiet. You let the world forget. Walter's gaze met his calm, unwavering. Silence was protection, he said. Not for me. For them. For everyone who would never understand. Legends are easier to carry than truths. And truths destroy you if you let them. A sudden disturbance broke the tension. A drunken outsider stumbled into the bar, bumping into a table where an elderly couple sat. Words were exchanged. The man raised his voice, mockery in his tone, too confident to realize he had just stepped into a room of quiet storms. Ryan tensed instinctively, reaching toward the confrontation, but Walter raised a hand, a simple, almost imperceptible gesture, and the room paused. The drunk stopped mid-sentence. His smile faded. The presence in the corner, the calm authority that radiated from the man, shifted the air. You don't know who you are talking to, Walter said quietly, voice carrying a weight that made the bar feel smaller, tighter, heavier. He did not move aggressively. He did not threaten. His gaze alone made the intruder hesitate, doubt, shrink in a way that mere words could never achieve. Ryan watched, stunned. This was power, not in violence, but in control, in presence. The same presence that had earned the call sign, the legend, and the fear whispered across battlefields. The Reaper was still there, but he had learned restraint. You come here thinking it is bravery to shout, to push, to dominate, Walter continued. True courage is measured in how you act when no one is watching, when there is nothing left but truth and choice. The drunk muttered something, backed away, and slunk toward the exit. The bar released the tension it had held for minutes, the sound of rain returning as the dominant rhythm. Ryan exhaled slowly, heart still racing. Sir, Ryan said, voice catching slightly. I came here thinking I wanted to learn about the legend, but I see now it is not about missions or medals. It's about the man, his choices, his control over the darkness he carries. Walter nodded, eyes softening. Exactly, he said. The legend may be what they whisper in fear, Lieutenant, but what matters is how you live after the battle, how you survive the weight, how you carry it without letting it break you. Ryan leaned back, absorbing every word. He felt the shift inside him, the lesson settling deeper than any classroom, any briefing, any training exercise could teach. He had come seeking awe. He found wisdom. Walter lifted his glass slowly, not as a challenge, but as a quiet acknowledgement. Ryan mirrored the gesture. In that silent exchange, the past, the present, and the weight of countless lives intersected. The Reaper was gone, Walter said without words, but the man who had carried the title and all it demanded remained, teaching without preaching, commanding respect without force, and Ryan knew he would carry that lesson far beyond the walls of Murphy's bar. Lieutenant Ryan sat forward, the weight of the night pressing on him like never before. Every word Walter had spoken, every pause, every shadow in his gaze, had built a tension that now seemed ready to break. The young SEAL's mind raced, wondering if he was prepared for the truth behind the legend, the name whispered in reverence and fear for decades. Walter rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced over the smooth wood. He looked at Ryan with eyes that had seen the world at its cruelest and at its most fragile. Every line on his face, every shadow under his eyes, spoke of a life carried with relentless discipline, sacrifice, and guilt. The room felt impossibly quiet. Even the rain outside had softened to a gentle patter. Finally, Walter spoke, his voice soft but steady. "My call sign was Reaper," he said. The words hung in the air, settling like dust in the stillness. The bar seemed to pause, as if every patron had collectively drawn a breath and dared not exhale. Every head turned, glasses balanced midair. Veterans froze in their seats, some blinking, some leaning slightly forward. The young men behind Ryan straightened instinctively, eyes wide, suddenly aware that they were in the presence of someone who had earned silence and respect in equal measure. Ryan felt his heart hammering in his chest. You are Reaper?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Walter inclined his head slowly. "Yes, but that man, the legend, he died long ago. I am only Walter now, nothing more, nothing less." The room remained silent, heavy with understanding. Respect did not need to be spoken. It was felt. It was the acknowledgement of a man who had walked through fire, who had carried the dead and the living alike, and had survived to teach without needing to boast. Ryan's hands wrapped around his glass, the amber liquid steadying him. "I came seeking glory, or at least understanding," he admitted. "But I see now that it is not about the call sign, the reputation, or the fear it inspires. It is about the man, the choices, and the burden he carries." Walter's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "That is the lesson," he said. "Not what they call you in the field, not the medals or the whispers, but how you live afterward, how you carry the weight without letting it crush your soul. That is the true measure of a man." The rain outside eased, light and steady now, as if acknowledging the closure within the bar. Ryan lifted his glass slowly, honoring the man before him. Walter mirrored the gesture, a silent exchange across generations and experiences. Veterans at nearby tables nodded subtly, some raising their own drinks in quiet respect. No words were necessary. The room had witnessed the legend, but more importantly, it had witnessed the man. Walter leaned back, eyes returning to the amber liquid in his glass, calm, collected, content in a way he had not allowed himself for decades. He had told his story, shared his truth, and in doing so, had lifted a weight from himself while teaching the next generation what courage truly means. Lieutenant Ryan rose from his seat slowly, understanding that some stories were not meant to impress, only to guide. He left the bar changed, carrying the wisdom of a man who had lived through the unimaginable, survived, and chosen peace. Walter watched him go, then took another quiet sip of whiskey. The Reaper had spoken. The legend had finally rested. The bar exhaled, and the night settled, gentle, solemn, and complete.